feel like we should pause for a minute after those beautiful poems. Thank you, Kaycee. So I will take a moment to say thanks to Neil and Teresa and the staff of NCLA. I know I'm a quiet talker, so I'm going to move this microphone closer. And also particularly to Mimi, who was an amazing mentor and a support throughout a whole year. I think in some ways, although it's wonderful to have a publication with Bloodaxe, but the surprise was the gift of mentorship, particularly if you spend a lot of time working with other people. To have someone pay attention to your work is a huge gift. So that was such a treat. But thank you to everyone who's made this possible. I just want to introduce the book. The book has two parts. The first part is really about my childhood in Iran and what it was like getting out, and some of the family stories about migration, which I'm going to largely read from tonight because I feel like I don't have much of a choice with the news around us as it is. It feels like it brings to life some of those stories. But I want to say there are poems in the second half about Scotland, about love, about lighthouses and keeping on the light. And I'll read a couple from there, but I'm going to focus largely on the beginning, or the first half. So the first poem I thought I would read is a poem I wrote long ago when the nuclear arms treaty was being signed with Iran, and everyone asked me what I thought about Iran being in the news. And I never know what to say to these, even now I never know what to say, because those of us who have family embroiled in conflicts of course, have personal stories as well as the political. So I wrote this poem in kind of a rage, thinking I would memorize it and recite it to people. I've never done that, but maybe I should. And it has a couple of things I'll tell you about. One is the reference to Chahar Shambe Suri, which is a Iranian holiday, which is a bit like Bonfire Night here, really fun, and the night before New Year, or the Wednesday before New Year. And the second is a reference to the last really happy memory I have of Iran, which was my mum taking us swimming in the dark, tucking me under her kind of wing and saying, come on, there's something I want to show you, but she wouldn't tell me what it was. It's called On Seeing Iran in the News, I Want to Say. On seeing Iran in the news, I want to say my grandmother was called Nasreen, that she died 2 years ago in Tabriz, and I couldn't go to say goodbye, that she knew nothing of power, nuclear or otherwise. I want to say that the bonfires for Chahar Shambe Suri were built by our neighbors' hands. So as children, we were taught to jump over and not be caught by the flames. I want to say my cousin Elnaz, the one born after I left, has a son and 2 degrees in chemistry and trouble finding a job. I want to say that the night we swam towards the moon hanging over the horizon of the Caspian Sea, we found ourselves kneeling on a sandbar we couldn't see, like a last gift. I want to say I'm the wrong person to ask. So as Neil said, my mum is an American, and she's a sort of 5'10" blonde Methodist American. So there was no real hiding for her during the Revolution, even when she wore a chador. But my parents didn't want to leave because they really believed in what was changing there, and in the need for a change of government, although nobody could see what was coming. So they took us to see demonstrations and all sorts of things that we shouldn't have seen, really. But what I think is interesting is that she had had real trouble at the end because it was unsafe for her to be outside, it was unsafe for her to be alone. And we often think of racism or the concerns many of us encounter as being one-sided, but of course for her, it was the other way just before we left Iran. So this next poem is about some of those things we saw as kids. It's called Shut Out the Noise. Close your eyes, cup your hands over your ears, then speak. Say, the day they shot all the doctors at the hospital for refusing to hide bodies, I was the girl watching from her grandmother's rooftop. Say, the staccato of sniper fire was a call to prayer, and the nightly track of tanks, a low toll of bell, almost pressure of sound than sound itself. Say the fire at our school was set, or the man dressed in white robes, walking our blacked out road after curfew, asked a question without opening his mouth. Say the words on every brick hurtled through our window. Yankee, go home. So as things became less and less safe for Mum, my brother and I were sent out as little children to do the shopping, which we thought was great because we'd never known such freedom. But one morning, and there were curfews at the time, so we weren't allowed out at certain periods. One morning we went out to get the bread, I think, and my mother's cigarettes at a time when it was okay for children to be sent out for their parents' cigarettes. It was really quiet. And this next poem is about that kind of surprise at finding the world you know very well suddenly changed. And of course, as all young children, just wanting it to go back to normal. It's called Crossing the Street for Mother's Cigarettes. Crossing the street for Mother's cigarettes, she is blonde, she is American. To the shop a block from home, I skip over shrapnel, the vestige of last night. The curfew and blackout, a clash I heard through my window, and wonder at the constitution of puddles. Water? Gasoline? Blood? I have been taught to cross this road, busy with traffic, with care. Tehran drivers don't watch for small children. But this morning, the road is silent. I cross it, first looking both ways, then again, half expecting, half willing those cars I can almost still hear to reappear. In that first part of the book, there are a few poems about Gaza, and I feel it's only right to read one of them. The two of them were responding to images that came through the Times newspaper. And this first one that I'll read is of a picture of a little girl running through the Barij refugee camp in Gaza, holding an even smaller boy. And if you can imagine, she's in yellow dungarees and the boy is leaning back. And everything around them is gray except for this little yellow set of dungarees. And sadly, I wrote the poem in 2014. Picture of girl and small boy, Barij, Gaza, 2014. I would like to tell her not to wear such flimsy shoes, that rubble contains the whole spectrum of knowable and unknowable dangers. Sheets of metal, ripped to knife's edge, live wires, bloated arms reaching for light. Her hair, scraped back into a ponytail, is open to sky. Remnants of buildings filter down one concrete chunk at a time, and the midday bells of rockets ring out above her. She carries a boy on her still narrow hips, his legs entwined around her yellow dungarees. Like a rodeo rider, his left arm grips her shoulder to steady himself or her, while his torso reels back and away. His body is asking to slow down, to turn back. Instead, her eyes comb the ground for a next step, fingers of her free hand curled into a claw, as if to frighten off what she somehow sees ahead. And I'm going to move from those poems of the experience of being, as a child particularly, in the middle of a revolution, to what happens when you land. And a lot of the book is sort of interested in that idea of how long it takes to become part of a place. I'm still asking that question. I've now lived in Britain longer than I've lived anywhere else, although I don't sound it. So this poem, which actually opens the collection, is called Refuge, and it's about a sculpture by Francis Bruno Catalano, which is of a man, if you can imagine, a bronze statue of a man holding a suitcase. But what's remarkable about the statue is that most of it is gone. So his head and his His shoulders are there, and his suitcase and arm is there, and then very little of the sort of knees on down is there. So as soon as you see it, your brain starts trying to figure out how it's standing up, which I think is a really lovely image for someone who lands here. And of course, I thought of my father when he finally got out. Refuge. Take out his heart, lungs, one arm, the whole belly, and the belt strap that holds it all in place. Let the lighthouse beacon throw its false light through him, promise safe passage. Take out his thighs, but leave his knees to buckle at kindness and the lack of it. Don't loosen his grip on the suitcase. It holds all he owns. Instead, nail his feet to the planks of the pier and let him try to take another step. And of course, I have lots of family that have grown old and died in places that aren't home. And I think I'll read a couple of those. The first is about my great-great-great-aunt, who was separated from her daughter Sogra at the Iranian-Azerbaijani border in 1917. And although there were only 150 miles between Baku and Tabriz, she never heard from or saw her again. What's lovely is that the family image of her that they had graces the cover of the book. And my father's memory of her was that she lost her mind with grief and circled the garden all day long, just speaking to herself. So I thought I would give her a voice. Khanum. I am not interested in Bolsheviks. Instead, it's the way light fell across my daughter's sleeping face, how she ate pomegranate, mouth brimming with tiny jewels, the way her nostrils would flare at the sight of mulberries. But when offered, tarofing, she'd eat. Like swallows we migrate, but there's no spring and no autumn in this place. Along with the samovar and the janamaz, I was walked from Baku across the border, 150 miles, a distance I measured in the steps it would take to return. Now, in Tabriz, my grandson skips into the courtyard where I spend daylight, wearing a path around the lilting fountain, speaking to the birds. He sits next to me under the mulberry tree and listens before asking if he can send a message back home too. My own grandmother, after the passing of my grandfather, became a kind of businesswoman in her own right. And I learned later after her death that she never really wanted to get married. She wanted to be a teacher, but her parents thought otherwise, so she was married off. And then I think she kind of got her own comeuppance, because when her husband passed away, she bought some shops and stalls in the bazaar and ended up buying flats and was a real businesswoman in her own right. But then as she got older, she was moved by my father, rightly, I guess, to the States. And I always wondered what it was like for her to be in this country where she didn't speak the language, and suddenly she was reduced to quite a small woman in a hijab in a country where she couldn't really communicate. So this next poem's about her. It's called Granddaughter, I Entered Your Mother's House. Granddaughter, I entered your mother's house as I entered every house, head covered, shoes off. I wore a black chador for all my outings. Your mother said, black is for funerals. What she didn't know was that I agreed. This funeral of a life. I'd been in mourning since my wedding. I entered my son's house as a stranger, reading each carpet as I might almond trees in bloom, or bolts of cloth to determine yield, how much they might fetch. Your parents prospered, didn't smile. I placed my shoes at the front door as is only proper. Bebachshid, they said, beshin inja, pointing to the largest lounge chair. I wanted to drop to the ground, fold my heels beneath me. I wanted to speak in the old language, the one your mother hadn't learned. But instead, I sank into the seat with a flick of the head, saying, Khayli Mamnoon, as if grateful, remembering how hard it is in this foreign land to keep holding the spine straight, to keep looking down. I'm proud to say that I'm now a British citizen as of this year, but I kept having this recurring dream when I was able to vote in Scotland, which I had the right to do earlier than becoming a citizen, that they would somehow turn me away. It became a kind of fear. So this next poem is about my first time voting and also that dream. Citizen. In my dream, it is always black and white, a line of people waiting, the stone building, fists of flyers, a glass door framed in steel. An old woman takes my name, checks it against her printout. Her pencil slides through the letters of the registered. I wonder again if I've gotten it wrong. In my dream, she asked me to say it again, Lotfi, spell it out, before turning me away. In my dream, I push through the exit and walk home in rain to a house that isn't mine, in a country that isn't mine. And then this last poem that closes the collection, which is ostensibly about a crabapple tree, which was found on an uninhabited Hebridean island. Scientists were excited about this tree because they think it has been there since the Ice Age, and they have no idea how it got there, sort of out with the range it should be able to live in or want to live in, and it had never been crossed with any other breed. Animals don't eat this particular kind, so it's a mystery. So they were excited about it, but of course I saw the people that stay rather than the people who choose to leave, whether that's a farming community in Scotland or places like Iran where most of my family stayed through the conflict and are still there. And of course, I think it's relevant just now for the people who are choosing to stay in Gaza. So I'll leave you with this. Thanks for listening. The Hebridean crabapple. This I understand, the instinct to cling at any cost to the place you are rooted, to see another season through, though the others seed elsewhere. Even in this sedentary act, you push the limit. Winter becomes summer, becomes winter, and you are steadfast on your crag, your outcrop. No one knows the shape of your limbs against a darkening sky. You question the need to grow against the wind. Despite what they say, there's no mystery in simply holding on. And what is home, if not the choice, over and over again, to stay? Thank you.